this is okay. This is even more interesting, okay? And if the Indians feel insulted, again, I'm sorry about that. Okay, this ambassador is a real diplomat, a real politician. He turns around and then takes a totally different position. Remember, just now we were looking at all his submissions to the Imperial Court of China, sort of advocating that we have to deal with the Tibetans exactly like the way the British deal with the Indians. Okay, but right now he is also trying to do his public relations work to the Tibetans. So he came up with this article, okay, and he was trying to sort of talk to the Tibetans. And you see what he tells the Tibetans is like that. He said, basically the idea is that don't listen to these English people, okay? You have to be close to the Chinese, because if you listen to British people, you'll be in big trouble. And that is, you see, the various foreign kings and rajas in India competed for power among themselves. The British exploited the situation and wiped out the country, and the sons and grandsons of generations after generations become slaves of foreigners. And what they're saying is that these Indians are now the slaves of the British, okay? Don't ever become the slaves of the British. You want to come to China. But remember, he was telling the emperor something just the opposite. If you combine the two, then you get a very embarrassing conclusion, and that this guy is actually advocating that the Tibetans would be, slaves generations after generations, okay? So anyway, this is from the subsequent Amban, Lian Yu. Okay, Lian Yu is the governor. Is the grand officer stationed in Tibet after Zhang Yintang. Okay, actually it's about the same time. Okay, 1908, 1907. So he has this suggestion. At that time, China was trying to adopt the Western constitutional monarchy system, okay? And they were trying to establish new systems and new laws. And they were trying to impose it throughout the country, and they were trying to get this Amban to try to institute that also in Tibet. And that is the Amban's, again, report to the emperor. For there are many differences between the foreign regions and the provinces. Note that Tibet's culture, somebody was asked, I think the lady is not here, but the lady was asking me whether there are other cultural factors to be considered between the Tibetans and the Chinese, okay? And this is the opinion of the Amban. Note that Tibet's culture, religion, government, and customs are not only different from the interior region provinces, they are also different from those in Inner and Outer Mongolia. In fact, what he's saying is that their differences with us is even bigger than the difference between the Mongolians and us, okay? The region has only a foreign relationship with us, and the people are of an alien race. They're not of the same race, they are 异种, okay, in Chinese. For years, they act arrogantly, secretly going against us, strengthen the military on their own, and resist us whenever an issue arises. Their stubborn inability to assess their own virtues and capabilities makes them irrational and totally beyond reasoning. The only way to subdue them is through military might. Then maybe we could coexist without incident. If we ever implement constitutional reform, we'll lose our sovereignty over them. People in the foreign region never willingly, this is very true, okay? I mean, again, this is very honest. People in the foreign region never, okay, 10 minutes. Never willingly submit to the master country. Correspondingly, the master country can never treat them as people in their own country. It's noted that among all the powerful Western countries, none ever gives constitutional privileges to the alien races in the foreign regions. Examples are the way, pardon me again, okay, the way Britain handles India, the US handles the Philippines, France handles Vietnam, Holland handles Java. However, as for Australia and Canada, because the race of the settlers is the same as the mother country, Britain, therefore they get the same rights as the people of the mother country. Britain treats the other foreign regions differently. Okay? And it's not that bad because you have to remember the background. This is, of course, I mean, I'm talking about quite a lot of years ago, but anyway. Now, we are emulating Western European countries in our constitutional reform. We should also emulate them in handling the foreign regions. In other words, we are emulating them in giving democracy to our own people, but to these alien races, okay, then don't give it to them. Okay, in other words, it's just that in Britain, they treat the Australians, or white Canadians very differently compared to the ways they treat the Indians. Okay, this slave, which is me, okay, I mean the Lian Yi, they call themselves slaves in front of the emperor. This slave has thoroughly discussed this matter with which is the other associate Amban, and we agree with each other, and therefore I dare to submit this report honestly. Imperial reign in comment. Okay, you can see these are actual archival records. Okay, and so you have the emperor. Actually, at that time it was the dowager, the empress. Okay, who was actually controlling this. Let the Constitutional Government Coordination Control Inspection Office learn about this report by imperial order. Okay, now those kinds of attitudes were shared not just by the officers, but it was sort of agreed upon by the emperor. So I want to go back to this table, which shows you in detail the personnel structure of the Li Fan Yuan. Okay, you have all these positions in the leadership. Okay, that's a minister of Li Fan Yuan. Okay, the archival office, executive office, blah blah blah, and all these offices. And then these are the supporting texts from the Qing history draft. This information, you get it from all these official documents published by the Qing government. In my book, I have the full sort of the extract of it from the Qing history draft. The Qing history draft, of course, is the most recent of all these publications, so it reflects the most recent sort of, because of course through the 267 years, the staff structure, of course, they were revised from time to time, but the basic structure remains the same. And as you can see over here is that this Li Fan Yuan, which the PRC translates into, remember, the Office of Mongolian and Tibetan Affairs, okay, which is a translation. Actually, you can see over here at the leadership level, these are all the quotas, okay, the positions have been fixed. 4 Manchurians, Mongolian, no Han, no Tibetan, okay? And then it goes lower, these are lower positions, okay? More senior positions, 2, 3, 1, okay? And then you can see that the Hans is altogether 13, and they actually only occupy the lowest position. They are scribes. The Hans were given jobs as scribes, okay? The Manchurians, of course, occupy a senior position. The middle position they shared with the Mongolians. So actually, there are more Mongolians, okay? There are more Mongolians, 155 positions compared to the Manchurians. But the Manchurians, of course, control everything. And then, of course, what's more interesting is the treasury. The treasury, of course, only Manchurians. They control the money, okay? Even the Mongolians don't get to say anything about money. And then please note that the Hans, of course, there were 13, and the Tibetans, it's so 0, okay? In other words, this office couldn't possibly have any duties or power in running, or in managing, rather, Tibetan affairs. What they did was, as I've explained last time, was they handle ceremonial matters like so-called tributary envoys coming in, okay, and giving them gifts and so forth. I think I'm running out of time, even though, should I stop now? Yeah, okay, fine.
2 minutes.
No, I don't think 2 minutes will make any difference. I think I'll just stop over here. So thank you very much. Appreciate that. Thank you.
Thank
What? Zhang Yin Tang. Yeah, in Mandarin it's pronounced as Zhang Yin Tang.
Who was he?
Well, as I said, he is one of the few and one of the very few Han Chinese who were given the position of the Amban, or what you call the Grand Officer station in Tibet. And he was considered as a very capable and a very virtuous officer by the PRC press and by the PRC group of scholars.
So,
sir,
just
this
a minute, please.
one more question is that Mongolia was part of China in the time of Dr. Sun Yat-sen. After the communist takeover, Mongolia separated from China.
Well, that is partially true. Again, that's debatable. There will be another topic that we can spend 10 hours debating, okay? The generally accepted version is this. The generally accepted version is that there is this Mongolia which already became, sorry, I thought this thing works, right? Yeah. There was Mongolia that was already somehow divided into a northern Mongolia and a southern Mongolia, which is what's Outer Mongolia and Inner Mongolia. And then the Outer Mongolian people more interested in independence, okay? And the Inner Mongolian people in general, they're more willing to be part of the Qing Empire, okay? And they were more dependent and more subordinate. And then when the 1911 sort of a revolution that toppled the imperial dynasty of Qing, the Outer Mongolia, they wanted to secede, but then eventually they were prevented from doing that, and then they got a help of, at that time, the Soviet Russia, and Soviet Russia actually helped the Outer Mongolia people to what you might call win independence, and eventually the ROC agreed to it and later reneged, but then strangely the People's Republic of China strongly supported the independence of Outer Mongolia because he wanted to please Soviet Russia, because Soviet Russia was saying that I want Outer Mongolia to be independent. The Chinese were, of course, very mad deep inside, but outwardly they didn't dare to show the anger because it was something that the Russians wanted, and so they agreed. And so, yeah, so Outer Mongolia became dependent. So that was, I would think that is a rather objective statement of what happened. But again, there are so many incriminations and so many finger pointing. A lot of Chinese today are very mad that the Outer Mongolia region was ever allowed to secede. And some blame the Chinese communists, some blame the Republic of China, which is coming down. And as I said, you know, we have to go into the detail. We have to really go into the regional records like that to find out who is right and who is wrong.
So that means that Mongolia was part of the Qing dynasty empire.
I would think that most people would say yes. But again, then you have to look at that. It's classified as a fund. So again, we come back to this same old question, okay? When you're classified as a white fund, who are you? And if it makes things complicated, it's because the Qing emperors, many of the emperors, they have used the word white fund to label not only the Tibetans and the Mongolians, they also use it to label the Russians and even the British, okay? And also, as one of the passages that I've shown, the extracts, they also then indicate that even though Mongolia and Tibetans, they are both white fund, but even among them, between them, the differences, Mongolia is closer to the empire, to the Hans, and these Tibetans are real alien people. So, I mean, it's complicated, okay? But I think what is generally agreed by these passages, and of course, just like the census figure, Qing Empire had detailed census figures for the Mongolia region. Qing has a separate code of laws for the Mongolia region, okay? But Qing Empire did not collect tax, and Qing doesn't have a tax code for the Tibetans. So one would argue that, yeah, Mongolia could be considered as part of China in a loose way. Yeah.
Hello, sir. So in 1948, Tibet's finance minister, Tsepen Shagapa, he actually went to, went for a trade mission in UK, right?
Yeah.
And that trade mission was, it was named as a trade mission, but it was mostly to have an international recognition of Tibet's sovereignty, right?
Mm.
So his passport, I think that can also proof for the sovereignty of Tibet. So I want to ask, like, why haven't you touched on this? Maybe China.
Yeah, there are a lot of materials that I haven't touched on. My book is 850 pages, and I have only so many hours. So yeah, what you have stated is one of the things that I have mentioned in my book, but I didn't have time. There are many. That factor is actually a very weak factor. You know why? And I have actually a stronger factor to help you out. And the reason is this. If you think about it, the fact that a rebel government, because if let me play the part of a devil's advocate. I'm the PRC. I'll say, okay, the fact that you have a bunch of rebels in Tibet that would send a team to visit troublemakers like the British people, what does it prove? Okay, so the British are willing to show the support to a bunch of rebels, okay, and they've always been making trouble with the Chinese anyway, okay? Why should that mean anything? Point number one. Point number two is that, okay, so Tibet has issued passports to these people to go to. Anybody today can print a passport. Even I today, I can print a passport of my name is Lau, okay? I'll say the Lau Kingdom, okay? I'll print a passport and give it to you, okay? So what does it mean? It doesn't mean anything. But it's even more important, though, is that, and which is what is in my book, is that, you see, the fact that the Tibetan government, or a bunch of rebels, like I call them, okay, the fact that they have printed a booklet and give it to their own people to travel to England doesn't prove that they have any stature. However, that is actually proof in the Chinese records that when the Chinese were sending officers to Tibet towards the end of the Qing dynasty, the Chinese government issued passports for these officers to gain entry into Tibet. This is a much stronger proof, okay? Because that would mean that the Qing government themselves recognize that for their officers to enter Tibet, they have to show a passport to the Tibetan government at the time. And in my book, I will give you the citation of the Chinese archival records.
And I wanted to know, like...
Buy my book, okay? But unfortunately, again, it's in Chinese. Learn Chinese.
So...
what's the possibility for is there any plan to translate that into English?
Well, for the next 2 years, I'm going to try to do that, but I have only so much time. Yeah, actually, I'll be happy if somebody would take over the translation, but nobody wants to take over the translation. If you're willing to help me to translate, I'll be happy to let you do it. Because my Chinese book, it's for free. I mean, I didn't collect any royalty. It was all done by voluntary work, by even the publishing, whatever, and then whatever proceeds will be donated. So if anybody wants to do it for free and translate in English, please tell me you're willing to help. Otherwise, it will
be more.
What?
If the book is in English or it's translated into English, readership will be more.
Oh, I know that.
India,
definitely.
Europe,
yeah,
America.
But I have to write it in Chinese because the material, they're all in Chinese. Okay? All these archival records, okay, they are all in Chinese. So I have to, first of all, organize them all in Chinese. Then I have to think about how to translate it, because translation is, just at the fun. Such a word fun, okay? I mean, how do I translate it? And remember to think about the Amban Zhu Zhang Da Chen Grand Officer Station in Tibet. Now that thing I have to explain to the non-Chinese speakers, okay, the structure, all those things is a lot more difficult. If I were to just write in Chinese, okay, then the Chinese will understand what I'm talking about.
Geshe-la, I think we should take his suggestion seriously, because there are Tibetan students who are studying in Taiwan, and in Taiwan they practice only the traditional characters. And I think in Singapore also it's traditional characters more than Mandarin from the mainland, not the simplified characters. So
yeah, we can talk about that later on if you want to.
Yes.
But it's not as easy as you think. And I don't think I want to go around begging people and say, I have this manuscript, could you please help me to translate it? Okay.
No, also it will be a force multiplier if the book can be translated not only in English but also in Tibetan.
Yes,
so
there is a Tibetan
yes.
that's doing the translation in Tibetan. I already have a Tibetan who is doing the work of translating into Tibetan. Yeah.
And before the next question, just a quick, not an intervention, but the key thing you must have noticed in his presentation was Mongolian and Tibetan Affairs Commission, MTAC. Believe me, till 2010, there was a Mongolian and Tibetan Affairs Commission in Taiwan.
There's still one. They haven't disbanded yet.
They haven't disbanded, but it is a toothless organization.
Well, yeah.
Because thanks to the Kuomintang, in 2010, when Ma Ying-jeou was their president, elected president, he disbanded the MTAC with, I mean, no funds. And till then, they used to offer lavish scholarships. That has ended. And secondly, this shows me the continuity and also discontinuity, because to me, the KMT, the Kuomintang, and also the CCP, Kungchendang, they have the same view when it comes to Tibet, that Tibet is China. And this is something which puzzles me in the sense one has evolved into becoming a democracy, the other is a one-party state, although it calls itself, hold your breath, a multi-party state, where all the other parties swear by the leadership of the Communist Party of China. That is a multi-party state on the mainland. So these are complications which I'm sure, I mean, he'll be looking into it later, but more questions, please. Yes, sir.
So, thank you so much. You have given wealth of information and documentary evidence that Tibet was an independent country. I have two comments on this. One is when there were dialogue between His Holiness the Dalai Lama representative and the Chinese government many years back, there were series of dialogue. Was this information available to the Tibetan government? This is my one question. Which
I'm sorry, information of what that's available?
What you have presented.
Okay.
This question may also be answered by Geshe-la. And the, I think for the present this question.
Okay, well, this time I've been invited by Geshe Damdul, okay, which is, of course, I think that you're closely associated with the CTA. You don't have to answer that question. And, of course, I've been invited to Dharamshala, and I made a number of presentations in Dharamshala. And I also, of course, was asked to have a meeting with Dalai Lama. So yeah, they are aware of my work. And in fact, the book that's being published in Chinese right now is published by a publisher which is openly sort of affiliated unit. It's basically the publishing arm of the Dalai Lama's office in Taiwan. Yeah, they know about, except that I try to keep a distance in the sense that, for example, my book has sort of no recommendations or no introductions or whatever written by Tibetans or whatever. It's basically it's a basic Chinese book for Chinese. Okay, I mean this particular publisher, they have published books that are pro-Tibet, and they would always include introductions or recommendations by prominent Tibetan figures. My book doesn't have anything. Okay, my book has basically just what I'm talking about. I'm not trying to say that this thing has the support of whatever Tibetans. Does that answer your question? Yeah, yes, the CTA is very well aware of what I'm doing. See, actually, personally, I think that one of the reasons why I'm documenting this is that if one day the Tibetan, not the Tibetan government, I'm sorry, the CTA, if the CTA wants to, I think the CTA once attempted to bring this case to the international court. And I think they were told that they didn't have enough evidence. Okay? And I hope that the materials in my book, if one day they want to try it again, this will give them some ammunition. You know? Yeah. But that's their decision. I mean, I keep telling people I'm not a Tibetan. I'm sorry.
At that time, this information, was it available?
What's that?
When there were talks between a representative of His Holiness and Chinese government, were this information available that time?
I'm sorry. This information is available at what time?
At the time of negotiation between His Holiness and the
No. I started sort of publicizing my research findings. I think the first time was 2 years ago. Okay, the first talk that I gave was a public talk. Well, I gave some talks to my students or whatever when I was still teaching in Hong Kong, and that was in 2012, 2011. But the real public one that attracted the attention of the mainland Chinese sort of the agencies was when I gave a talk in Taiwan, which is organized by, among other people, the Dalai Lama's office in Taiwan. Okay. And then eventually, then it was in Brussels. It was very, very international. So, but it was 2 years ago. Yeah. In other words, it came too late. But
yeah. I was just wondering whether the attitude of PRC is different towards the Chinese diaspora or the Chinese people who have fled China, vis-a-vis the Tibetans who have fled Tibet.
oh, the nature is totally different. There's no relationship. There's no resemblance. And of course, their
So
attitude.
how is it different in the sense, how are they treated? The Chinese and the Tibetans?
Well, the Tibetans perceive that their homeland has been taken away by a foreign country, okay? And if these Tibetans left, it's because they left because their perception is that they were being oppressed by a foreign ethnic group or foreign power. The Chinese, like me, for example, my parents left China voluntarily, and it was because they viewed it as a chance to have a better job, better income in a British colony because they went to Singapore. They of course didn't think highly of the Chinese government at the time, but strangely, I think this is true with a lot of countries. The Chinese who emigrated to Hong Kong and to Singapore, okay, they don't actually blame the Chinese government for not having taken care of them very well. In fact, even though they emigrated to a British colony, well, even today you see a lot of Chinese that go to the United States, okay? They make much nicer salaries, okay? They have freedom, whatever, but they're still very loyal to China. And in fact, the joke is that they go to the United States, they complain about the United States, they complain about American government. First they go individually, then they bring in the wife, then they bring the kids, then they bring the parents, okay? And after they bring in the parents and the kids and then the wife, okay, then they start condemning the United States. And I always say, why do you go back to China? Okay? But no, they on one hand, they recognize that that their livelihood would be much worse in China, but on the other hand, they're very pro-China. And this is the beauty of Chinese education. But I guess you see that in many countries. I'm sure actually I see that among the Indians, to be honest with you. Okay? You see a lot of Indians that actually behave very, very similarly. They emigrate to the United States. They have good jobs. But they're always talking about all these Indian customs, okay, and how great they are now. And then, of course, sometimes I hint the same way. I say, well, why do you go back to India? I'm sorry, but you have asked me a question that my only answer that I can give you that is honest is also very blunt and unpleasant. I'm sorry. But do you see my point? No, I find it very amusing that and also very awe-inspiring and also very frightening. I see it very frightening that somehow the communists are able to educate Chinese in such a way that the Chinese somehow believe that if they're in a foreign country, no matter how well they are doing in these foreign countries, they need not be thankful to these foreign countries because they are foreigners. And no matter how badly they were treated in China, they still should be loyal to the Chinese government, not China. They had to be loyal to the Chinese government in power because that's the motherland. That's what they believe in. I mean, these people suffered a lot when they were in China, but then after they left China, okay, because they couldn't stand the suffering, they still want to be loyal to not China, the government of China. And because they equate the governor of China with the motherland. Now, I personally think that I don't see why. I mean, I'm a very patriotic person. Okay, I spend all my time reading Chinese books. Okay, as you can see. Okay, I mean, obviously, I couldn't have come up with all these passages and all these extracts without having read a lot of Chinese books. I spend all my time in Chinese culture. Okay, but the way I look at it is that simply because I'm loyal to Chinese culture doesn't mean that I should be loyal to the Chinese government that is occupying China. Okay, but I'm the minority.
Would you say that Chinese have a weakness for authoritarianism?
Not any more than other countries, frankly. No? Not really, honestly. Well, I mean, okay, you're really forcing me to say this. If you look at India, for example, you have the Kashmir problem, you have the problem, between the Muslims and the Hindus, and if you think about it, okay, the way they behave and the way they react is really not that different from the way the Chinese react to the Tibetan problem, okay? And also the way things are taught. I mean, most Chinese would react very violently once you talk about Tibet problem. Is that Tibet has always been part of us. Who told you so? Well, I've always been told that way. Tibet has always been part of China, and if you try to take away Tibet, it's like you're taking away a part of my flesh. Where did you get the history facts? Did you actually check the sources? Well, I don't know how many Indians check their sources when it comes to question like, whatever. India has, again, a lot of ethnic groups, right? I mean, did you check the original sources about how they came about and how India came about? There was no India. I mean, there was all these Maharajas and Rajas, right? And they have different religions, okay? But today there's an India.
Ma'am,
it becomes a very, I'm sorry, I don't want to say further, otherwise you're going to hit me.
It's quite complicated, but as
That's
Indians, we find it difficult to go to Tibet, and we can only go in groups of 7, and the 8th person will be a Chinese, in double quotes, guide. And because 8 is a lucky number in China, as an individual I can't go to Tibet. So it at one level reveals insecurities. At another level, we reveal our insecurities by not allowing foreigners to go to parts of our country where there are political issues. And so both the countries have their own fair share of internal issues which need to be deliberated, discussed, and political settlements found. Another aspect is that as a student of international relations, international politics, Sino-Indian relations, etc., Tibet is a very alive issue these days. And it is not a domestic issue for a very simple reason. We Indians as a people, we are not concerned about foreign policy. If there is foreign policy which the average Indian talks about, it is to do with terrorism which comes from our northwestern dear neighbor Pakistan. Apart from that, we don't discuss politics, international politics at all. And very few people in India discuss issues like sovereignty. We speak in English, we discuss sovereignty. But I have not come across any writings in the vernacular. Only in a few vernacular languages like Bengali and maybe Malayalam and Tamil. That's it. And it puzzles me that there are 2 surprisingly successful long-term democracies in Asia, India and Japan. And these are 2 outstanding democracies who have outstanding territorial disputes with all their neighbors. In Japan's case, maritime; in India's case, territorial, and till a couple of years back, even maritime. Maritime has to do with Kachativa, an island in dispute between Sri Lanka and India, where fisher people from both the countries used to fight over the fishing reserves or whatever it is, or the fish catch that comes seasonally. That was settled. But otherwise, Japan and India, we have outstanding territorial disputes with all our neighbors. Not settled. With Bangladesh, Teen Biga corridor has been officially settled but not been implemented. With Myanmar, there is the issue of the Rohingyas, and there are parts where even I as an Indian citizen can't go in the northeast of our country. When it comes to Arunachal Pradesh, China claims Arunachal. China used to claim Sikkim till 2003, when the then Prime Minister Atal Bihari Vajpayee went to Sikkim and broke all protocol and insisted on just crossing the so-called boundary, not demarcated, and shocked the station commander on the Indian side. He was the Prime Minister. He just crossed over, shook hands with the Chinese counterpart, the PLA commander there, who was equally shocked, and then came back. A week after that, China dropped a web page on the Ministry of Foreign Affairs, which I remember very clearly used to say, China does not recognize the illegal occupation and annexation of Sikkim by the Republic of India in 1975. Till then, they used to have a separate web page called China-Sikkim Relations. 1 week after late Atal Bihari Vajpayee's crossover and return immediately, that web page disappeared. Do a Google search, that it will say this page is not to be found. That is a Chinese way of acknowledging that Sikkim is India's. And when Doklam happened, people in our country were only talking about China being very aggressive. Yes, they are aggressive. Second, we completely lost out the message that was being sent not to India. It was to Bhutan, with whom we have a territorial dispute. Chinese are very lavish in settling boundary disputes with neighbors who are small and who pose no threat in security terms and economic terms. But Chinese were debating as to how can a republic, we Indians do not understand, Bhutan is no longer a monarchy. It is a constitutional monarchy with an elected democracy. And they fail to understand, Chinese, how can a republic have a foreign policy decided by another country, which is India? So this what Doklam happened to pressurize the Bhutanese to settle the boundary dispute, which none of our esteemed anchors on television, I'm not naming them, but they refuse to, acknowledge this or even understand. It was just laughed at. Then of course I'm not getting into Pakistan or even Nepal. With Nepal we have a territorial dispute which can be settled easily, but which won't be because of domestic issues on their side which spilled over onto our side. And we, I think, overstretched ourselves by blocking trade and transit with Nepal, and nobody knows how many Nepalese died for lack of medicines. And Pakistan, I'm not getting into that. It'll take, he took 8 hours. I could take 80 hours to discuss that. So, he's the guest of honor. And any more questions, please, in the sense? If there are no questions, I think sure.
Hello. With this two-day lecture series has successfully come to an end, and it has been most wonderful and enriching experience for everyone present here. So the history of Ming and Qing dynasties were very particular, Professor, particular and precise, which did justice to prove Tibet as an independent nation and was never a part of China. since from antiquity, which disproved People's Republic of China's claim of historic sovereignty over Tibet. So with this thought, I would like to request our director, Venerable Geshe Doje Damdila, to kindly present souvenir and kada to our speakers and chairperson. Professor Lau.
Thank you, sir. Thank you. Thank you very much. Thank you.
Jada, Professor Ravi.
Is this better? What? Oh. Yeah, okay. Thank you.
Thank you, Geshe-la. And with heartfelt gratitude, we would like to thank Professor Lau for coming all the way from Singapore only for this lecture, and we hope that you will visit India again and enlighten us again.
Thank you.
And Professor Ravi for chairing the session, and we thank you very much, and Venerable Geshe-la for always guiding us for every programs, and Tibet TV for covering this lecture, and my colleagues for working tirelessly, and without your support, this lecture wouldn't be possible. So I would like to bring curtain over this enriching today lecture series, and thank you, good night, and we'll see you in our next conferences.